In the southern oceans of Dominia Prime lay a continent of great kingdoms. Far from the war between Urza and Mishra, the lands of Sarpadia prospered. But as the climate changed, resources dwindled and empires crumbled. Hideous new species arose in the forests and the seas, forcing the Sarpadians to fight for their very survival. Recruit these toughened warriors and vicious predators for your duels, but beware, lest you fare no better than the fallen empires. We return. Today we're here to talk about the Dwarves and some other things of fallen empires. Last week we went through our introduction and we talked about the orcs and goblins, who are the adversary creature types within Red. Again, Fallen Empires is structured around these conflicts where within every color there's a civilization and I don't know what to call them, invaders, adversaries, something that is
there's conflict.
Yeah.
Discord.
I want to phrase it in some very bleep-worthy ways, like...
Okay.
I just want to say they want to their up, and I'm going to have to bleep that now.
We're going to have to bleep it. I mean, you can bleep anything. It doesn't have to be an expletive.
You can even bleep.
That's true. Can't say on screen.
Anyway, so dwarves. Not a ton of dwarf cards. I think we have 4 or 5 here to look at. With dwarf in the name.
Yeah.
There's just one common. It's a common 3, Dwarven Soldier. What does it do?
Dwarven Soldier is a 2-drop 2/1 that says if Dwarven Soldier blocks or is blocked by orcs, it gets +0/+2 until end of turn.
Yeah. So I'd like to go off on a tangent immediately, which is kind of setting the tone of what power and toughness mean in Magic. And I know I've gone off on this before when we did our Drudge Skeletons deep dive episode, but if you look at just this trio of vanilla creatures from Alpha, and I think it's particularly useful, not because we're looking at red cards today, but because red in the original color pie, and I guess kind of still, is just kind of neutral in terms of creatures. Like green has extra efficient creatures. That's part of its identity. Blue has less efficient creatures, but sometimes they're flying and sometimes they're big. That's part of its identity. But red is just like, it just has some creatures. And so if we look at the range of those creatures at common with no special abilities, we get a real good sense of what the intent was at the time Alpha was released, of what these things mean world building wise. And by that, I'm really focused on 1/1 sounds really small. In games, we're just used to looking at bigger numbers most of the time. Like in D&D, our characters, all their stats are between like 10 and 18 when you start a new character, usually, right? Just bigger numbers. And I think it's very clear that in designing Magic, Richard Garfield realized, if I want to have board states where each player can have half a dozen creatures on a pretty regular basis, and they gotta remember their life totals and how much damage has been done to each of these creatures before resets at the end of the turn, you can't get that big of numbers. You have to keep things in the single digits for the most part. But then that causes the restriction of, how do I make these imposing things seem imposing? And I think it's just a compromise you had to make and go with the small numbers. And so you have Monza's Goblin Raiders. They're kind of... that art isn't super intimidating, but I mean the intent is that it's like a warband. One.
So just like your basic aggressive creature is a 1/1.
Yeah, so if an entity is fierce enough to be represented in the game at all, that's already kind of a bar to clear, and that's a 1/1. Yeah. But that also means we lose some nuance. Like, it seems like a goblin should be a little bit smaller than a person. Like, if they were D&D characters, maybe, or kind of using those kind of numbers, maybe a basic human warrior would have been like a 12/12, and they could have made a goblin like a 7/5 or a 6/6 or something. But since we're here, I think you have a lot of things that kind of round to a 1/1 that are kind of vaguely comparable. But then, so a gray ogre, which looks really intimidating to me, like in Lord of the Rings movies in Moria, you have they're all in, is it Balin's tomb, and the goblins invade and they have a cave troll.
Yeah.
To me it feels like, you know, the goblins are the goblins and the cave troll.
Yeah, like the cave troll would be kind of like this creature.
Yeah.
Like it's definitely
Somewhere between the Grey Ogre and the Hill Giant.
Yeah.
But
I think that's fair.
yeah, but like 1+1 Grey Ogre, like two hobbits or something does not feel equivalent to that, or two goblins from that scene. But you don't want to have like a 40-40 and a bunch of 1/1s.
Sure.
So this is kind of the scaling.
I think that tracks. I think like for simplicity's sake, we can reduce it to a basic creature is a 1/1.
Yeah.
And that's kind of a, you know, sure, in a lot of games we do get really into the stats and like hyper-specific stuff. But I think that works.
Yeah.
You know, this is like its potential for lethality and like how much damage it can take at the same, you know, it's simple and it works.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do agree that a 3/3, even though the maths out, is not equivalent to like 3/1/1s.
Yeah. Just in terms of the world building,
in
like
terms
the
of the
flavor
in terms
of
of the flavor, that like the 3/3 Hill Giant, like that's an imposing, like mid-boss level entity that you're going to go up against. Where the some of these other ones are like, okay, these are like kind of tougher enemies that you might fight, but not necessarily like you don't need to stock up on potions before you get in there.
Yeah.
This is kind of the vibe I'm feeling.
Yeah. So it's with that kind of baseline and context that I try and look at, especially in early Magic, you know, new cards and what they mean.
Yeah.
So Dwarven Soldier here. We've had a few Dwarves printed before this. Alpha had a couple of 1/1s, one at common, who was the Dwarven Warriors, who could tap to make a creature of power no greater than 2 unblockable till end of turn, which feels like a kind of digging tunnels kind of thing.
Okay.
Which is the thing we associate with dwarves, right? And then they had the Dwarven Demolition team, also 3 mana for a 1/1 tap to destroy a wall. Already, that's a little surprising to me that dwarves, who I think of in fantasy as being, you know, some fantasy mythi have them as being like made of stone, animated stone. In general, dwarves are considered really tough, so I kind of figured their toughness would be higher. Just by default they'd be 1/2s or something.
It's interesting that these original dwarves are 1/1s, and then when we get into Fallen Empires they are base 2/1s.
Yeah. And so I mean, warriors versus soldiers. But still, it seems surprising to me that if they're going to give us something that's more of a foot soldier, because the ones in Alpha were 3 mana each. And if you're going to be moving toward, well, people can make decks about a creature type, which is what Fallen Empires is seemingly all about, you'd need just some inexpensive grunts. Yeah. And this seems to be what this card is more or less supposed to be.
Yeah, and like at this point in the game, we don't have the formats that we have now, so like all you have is 60 card constructed, right?
Yeah,
so
pretty much.
Like you're not gonna be playing, you're going to want the grunt creatures, like you said, to fill out that list.
Yeah.
And yeah, so it's interesting that we've got these guys. Now I think it's also kind of curious that they are so they can be tougher, but only when they're blocking orcs.
Yeah.
Like that's a very specific ability.
It is. It's really weird. I've been thinking about what does that mean.
Yeah.
First of all, it bothers me a little bit that they buffed the power rather than the toughness, because they just should be. That seems backwards. Yeah. But then, what do you think that represents? I have some ideas.
I don't know. My initial idea is that there's so much animosity between dwarves and orcs that if they're in a fight, they become tough. They are able to withstand more damage because they're just so angry.
So it's like a barbarian thing.
It's like a barbarian, yeah. Like it's some kind of buff they get, but only when they're fighting orcs.
I'm really mapping everything onto D&D today for some reason. But what I was thinking is it's like most favorite enemy, isn't that?
Okay,
that's a ranger thing, right?
Is it? Yeah.
I think so. But it feels kind of like the same thing. Like they've studied the tactics of the goblins and the orcs, and they know exactly how to fight them, and so they can.
Yeah, there's a long-standing blood feud here.
Like, maybe I would have gone with first strike instead of extra toughness for that, but, you know, I can see how that would mean that.
Yeah.
But, even if that makes sense within just looking at this card itself, it doesn't really make sense in the big story of this set, which is that the dwarves were the first civilization to fall, and they lost to the orcs and goblins. So if they were so good at it, how did this happen?
Well, going back to last week, if you watched that video, I think one of the things we touched on was flavor-wise, if we're not taking the orcs seriously, I can see how, even with everything they know about them...
Yeah.
Maybe, is this how they lose the war, that they're just not taking them seriously until it's too late? Because, everything we've been presented so far in the flavor of the card game doesn't seem like the orcs should have won this fight.
Yeah. It doesn't. I don't know. It bothers me a little bit. But there's also... If this is the answer, I hate that they went outside of the card text to do it. And we talked about Erva Yura's daughter being the mercenary who switched sides. Yeah. And like that is the narrative as presented in the Duelist short story, more or less. That's kind of a disappointing. Like the cards should tell their own story. And they've gone to the effort to try and make the cards tell their own story. It's just the mechanics don't seem to quite match up with the flavor text in this particular instance. Which seems like a minor complaint, but that's exactly the kind of complaint we're making these videos to make.
That is why we're making these.
That is why this is a
that is why
mini-episode deep dive on Fallen Empires.
That's why we're making a mini-series about this, is to make minor complaints.
All right, so let's have a look at the actual specific individual cards here and their flavor text.
So the first one that we were looking at this is the one with the Douglas Schuler art, and this one says, although the dwarves staunchly defended their walled city-states against the orcs, their civilization was the first to fall, and its name was sadly lost. Sarpadian Empires, Volume 1.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting, because they give us the name of one of their the Crimson Peaks. We'll come to that now in another flavor text in a second. But so I guess we see that name, but their civilization had a different name that we've lost. Oh, okay. In any case, this is, I think, the evidence that the Volume 1 of the Sarpadian Empires, as described on the wiki, is kind of the overview of the whole conflict, and then each of the within a color balances has their own volume that focuses more on that.
Yeah, they're Wikipedia's like subheadings.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. What do you think of that art?
I like it okay. It's not my favorite of these three.
Yeah.
But I like it.
It's a little cartoonish.
Yeah.
But it definitely feels core in flavor for early Magic.
Yeah. It doesn't look out of place.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it. Next one, though, the Randy Asplund Faith art, there's something about it that does look kind of out of place, despite the fact that of these three, I think it might be the technically best. It's certainly the most detailed.
Yeah.
And I don't know what it is. It just feels more like Lord of the Rings art rather than Magic art. I don't know what I mean by that. But I would not be surprised if it showed up on the newer... What was the second collector set they did of the Lord of the Rings cards? They had alternate art by...
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they, what was that? What was that called? Yeah, perhaps it was a bit of foreshadowing or something else, but, you know, they didn't want us to be overwhelmed with too many cards to collect back in 1994. And now here we are in 2024 with... so many alternate versions of various things.
Have we actually read that quote yet?
Oh, I don't know. Did I skip ahead? I might have skipped ahead.
All right, so I don't think we actually covered this last time, but this is so after the short stories in the Duelist, they had this kind of intro to Fallen Empires thing, and it's very much more breaking the fourth wall. Here we are, the developers of this game, talking to you, the audience.
And it's quite fun how they word this. So, best of all, Fallen Empires offers even more ways than usual for players and collectors to disagree about the number of cards in the expansion. While there are 102 functionally different Fallen Empires cards, there are actually 187 cards with different art and flavor text in the expansion. Well, we were happy with the proportion of rare to common cards, but also understand that it's frustrating to wind up with 40 extra Sylvain elves or any other common card. So, in Fallen Empires, the more common cards have 3 or 4 different pictures and flip pieces of flavor text. This way, instead of 40 extra elves with all the same picture and flavor text, you wind up with 4 different piles
of 10 elves.
Yes, which have the same play value, but completely different aesthetic value, which, as we know, is its own category.
Yes, yes.
Don't worry, though. It's really not harder to collect. Even though there are 85 duplicate cards, we learned from the strip mine mistake in Antiquities and made all of the duplicate cards common. Those 85 extra cards allow us to provide more art and more of the storyline behind the expansion without drowning you with 300 card expansions every few months.
Yep. Wizards 1994. Yep. All right, back to...
So anyway, back to Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Okay, the Hildebrandt brothers.
Yes.
That's right. That's what I was thinking of, the Hildebrandt brothers.
Mm-hmm. And that's what this art reminds us of.
Yeah, well, it reminded me of that. Does it remind you of that?
It does, yeah. Now that you point that out, I do get that sense.
Yeah. I think it might actually be a better fit in more modern sets. It's just... It was ahead of its time.
Something. It was ahead of its time. It was visiting 1994, and maybe it should have been here in 2024.
Yeah. Anyway, you want to read the flavor text on that one?
Yeah, so this one says, there is a legend among present-day dwarves that the dwarves of Sarpadia will one day return to defend dwarven kind against a deadly peril.
Yeah, that's just, I mean, that is kind of nice background, but it doesn't really tell much addition about the story.
No, and what kind of creature? Is this a dragon?
It kind of looks like it. It doesn't show up anywhere else. I like it, though.
Yeah, so that's interesting, because this doesn't really... Again, this isn't illustrating the conflict with the orcs.
Yeah.
It's just a single dwarf beating up a dragon.
As one does.
As one does.
And then the last one we have is Rob Alexander with the flavor text, "Let no one say we did not fight until the last. Headstone fragment from a mass grave found in the Crimson Peaks."
Now, this one, I don't know if it's the best art to represent this card, but this is my favorite art of the 3.
Mine too. Easily. It's really... It conveys the feel that I think the set is meant to convey. Fallen empires. It's in the distant past, and it's tragic.
Yeah, this one has a sadness to it that the other 2 don't have.
This feels like it's memorializing a fallen proud race. Yeah. Man. Good work, Rob Alexander.
You made us feel something in the distant future.
All right, so any other thoughts on the Dwarven soldier before I move on to the uncommons?
No, just the toughness thing bothers me. That's the highlight there.
All right, Dwarven Armorer is an uncommon 1.
So this is a single red 0/2 creature.
Finally, we get a 1 mana dwarf.
This is a 1 mana dwarf. Right. No power, all toughness. You can pay 1 red and tap this creature. Discard a card from your hand to put either a +0/+1 or a +1/+0 counter on a target creature.
Before we get into those counters, because that's definitely the lead here, I think it's neat in line with my point about 1/1s meaning something, about small stats still being representative of kind of threatening things. It's neat that the Goblin Chirurgeon and the Dwarven Armorer are 0/2s. That they're, you can be an adult being who's capable of contributing to, like, a military effort and still be a 0 power creature. Because being a 1 means something. Means you can do some damage, and this guy makes his contributions in other ways.
Yeah, I think that's cool.
Yeah. And I understand this is like many things in this set. It's cool flavor. It's not as great mechanically. Like, it would not be fun if we still had a bunch of 0 power things in Magic all the time. Not advocating for that, but the picture it paints is pretty neat.
Yeah, I think that is a neat thing to have, like, sporadically in a set.
Yeah.
Because I kind of think that, like, if we made card versions of ourselves, like, I would probably be a 0 power creature.
Yeah.
But I might have Death Touch or something. So, like, if you gave me a weapon, if you equipped me with something, then that would change.
And this Dwarven armor can use...
he could help me out with that.
Use his activated ability to do that for himself or you or anyone else.
He can, again, this is another cool one, much like the Goblin Chirurgeon, he can target any creature. So this is not restricted to other dwarves, it's not restricted to other goblins, because some of them do have those restrictions where it's type dependent. But no, he can help anyone.
I love the flavor of this. I mean, he's an armorer, and he makes stuff, and it's kind of pre-equipment. Yeah. Like, it was Mirrodin before they invented equipment and added that to the game, which is, 10 years into the game.
Yeah.
And they played with it, the concept around that for quite a while. And this is a pretty flavorfully good way to do that. Mechanically, having a bunch of different permanent counters on things with all kinds of different power and toughness modifiers was a nightmare. And they stopped doing that. But before they stopped doing it, they made this set. And this set, we're going through every card. We'll get through them all eventually. But just this one card, if you just have glass beads or something, which was what they sold, the revised starter kit just had a little bag of glass beads. Hey, use these as counters.
Yeah, this is not easy to represent that.
To differentiate between them. I mean, you have that one card making two different types. So, okay, I'll use pennies for this and nickels for this.
Yeah, this is getting into some complex, this is way before we had to deal with things like finality counters and other things that we had to represent.
And on top of that, there are 6 different combinations of plus and minus counters that I put in Fallen Empires alone. And then in the Duelist, I don't know if it was the issue that came out right before or right after. I guess we should clarify, the Duelist has been out of print since 2000. The Duelist was published by Wizards of the Coast. It was a magazine about Magic largely, but it also became about Pokemon too. And that they despite being by Wizards, they covered the entire collectible card game market. Anyway, with one of the issues right around the time Fallen Empires came out, they put in an insert with punch outs of tokens and counters. And I'll put this on the screen, but you can see there's +2/1, +1/2, +1/0, +0/1, +2/2, -2/2, -1/1, and +1/1.
Yeah, I'm glad that they went away from this.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a pain that they made a unique rule that says if you have a -1/-1 and a +1/+1 counter, you just remove both.
Yeah.
And that's because this just gets out of control pretty quickly. And of course, we've reinvented the problem with tons of ability counters now. But now...
Yeah, we have all kinds of new problems in place of this one.
We have an enormous ecosystem where you can get all these fancy counters, and they include punch cards in individual packs now.
Yeah, we have some actually just right here. They give you hexproof counters,
all
flying
over this room.
counters. I was cleaning out a purse the other day. I don't know why, but I had some of these in my purse.
I mean, I have.
Yeah, we have this
from Amonkhet.
Yeah, so they've experimented. This is a early precedent, I guess, of them experimenting with these different kinds of counters that you can apply to creatures that stay on them for more than just a turn cycle.
Yeah. So, absolute flavor win. Mechanically, it was... I mean, I don't mean mechanical balance-wise. I actually have no idea how this plays out because it's so convoluted. I've never tried it, and that kind of says what I have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think on the whole, when we're playing Magic, it doesn't feel fun to have a bunch of real tiny little creatures just chipping away at each other. It feels like that would equal longer, grindier games. Generally we want to be building up to some bigger creature who's swinging for at least, I don't know, 4 or 5. Maybe we could aspire to more. Or you have a lot of them. You have enough that you can close out the game.
Stormherd?
Yeah.
Anyway,
But yeah, if this was the entirety of the game, if it was just a lot of 0/2s and then some 1/1s, that just doesn't have the spice I think a lot of us are looking for.
Fair enough. I mean, speak for yourself, but also okay.
Yeah, I mean, you're the green player, so you tell me.
Saprolings.
Yeah,
they're coming.
They are coming. We're getting to them.
But this does have flavor text too.
It does.
And that is?
This one says, the few remaining pieces from this period suggest the dwarves eventually made weapons and armor out of everything, even children's toys. From Sarpadian Empires, Volume 4.
That's back to really adding to the story, I think.
Yeah.
I like that. It shows that desperation.
Yeah. But, like, also innovation. They're able to come up with something instead of just like, well...
Yeah, it both describes their state and what's happening in their world, but also tells you more about them. It
feels tragic, but yeah, they're innovative, they're resourceful, they're not just going to give up.
Yeah, that's great. And I glossed over earlier that there was also the Dwarven Weaponsmith in Antiquities, which is kind of, well, it's very similar mechanical area. So let's look at how that worked.
Yeah, so this one, you tap this creature during your upkeep to add a permanent +1/+1 counter to any creature.
Old templating.
Yes, each time you use this ability, you must choose one of your artifacts in play and place it in the graveyard. This artifact cannot be one that is already on its way to the graveyard. And artifact creatures killed this way may not be regenerated. I just want to take a moment before you hold your thought. I love the phrasing, cannot already be on its way to the graveyard.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite things in older Magic cards.
I know, and it came up a lot.
It is. It's on a lot of things. It's like, you cannot pick one that's already headed there. That does not work.
I was just going to try, without looking at Oracle, I was going to try and phrase this normally, because you might have zoned out before we got to the end of it.
Yeah.
And it just says, tap and sacrifice an artifact.
Yes.
Put a 1/1 counter on a creature.
That's what you would say in the present day.
But the sacrifice was not a keyword. Yeah. It didn't have a technical meaning.
Yeah.
And
there were some really fun, before they printed the time-shifted modern cards.
Yeah.
I remember coming across some really fun templating for a retro border version of Yawgmoth 3 Inquisition that tried to explain proliferate in this language.
No.
The text was like size 3.
They got it on there though?
They got it on there. It was just real cumbersome.
That's fair. All right. Any observations about the art for Dwarven Armorer?
On this one, I really like the light and colors. I think it's because they use so much blue that it just really pops with the red border.
You know what? Yeah, and I don't perceive it as blue. I see it as shadow, which is exactly the intent.
But like, it's the color value is like
you're absolutely
so much blue in this art. It looks really good with the red border.
Yeah, to me, it's like, oh, it's dark and gold, but no, it's blue.
Yeah, and I think it fits too with the idea that like there is some lighting around the dwarf in a way that's like, oh, he's like
it's
in an armory. Yeah, there's a forge behind him. We're seeing that light hitting his back.
Yeah,
I think it's really good. I like it a lot.
Agreed. Next, and this is the last dwarf creature, is the Dwarven Lieutenant.
So this is a 2-red 1/2 creature with an ability. You pay 1 and a red. Target dwarf gets 1/0 until end of turn.
And the flavor text, Dwarven officers were tireless in battle, moving up and down the lines to rally their troops and boost morale. Sarpadian Empires, Volume 4. So this is, of all the dwarf cards, this is the creature type matters card. I think it's probably the first card that cared about whether you had a dwarf or not. Because like we keep going over this. I'm just obsessed with the Alpha Lords. You know, we had the Goblin King and the...
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's become a very integral part of the game. Like, as we were talking about, if you play Commander, if you go to EDH Rec, for instance, one of the primary ways that decks are categorized is by creature type. Yeah. Like, that is a super popular way to play with the cards.
Yeah. And so that was definitely a good move on their part to make Fallen Empires about that.
Yeah.
And they didn't really lean into it that heavily. At least, they leaned into it very heavily in that most of the creatures are of these types, but only of a sparse few care, or a card that mechanically cares specifically about that creature type. But, okay, so this one's a 1/2. Higher toughness. I like that. But it buffs power only. I don't like that.
I think flavor-wise, it works in that, like, he's trying to hype them. He's a hype man, you know? He's, like, trying to get his guys riled up and ready to march to their deaths. But, you know, like, you can only make somebody so tough. Like, I feel like you can... Yeah. You can verbally motivate someone to fight more offensively, but you can't really boost their inherent toughness.
Yeah. I guess I don't care that much about exactly what it does, but... about that.
I like that this only lasts until end of turn, and it's not going to make the math with all those counters really, really complicated.
I mean, yeah, you're right.
Like, it's going to wear... I only have to worry about that now, and it's not going to make that problem worse.
Yeah. I guess what I was trying to say is I am less concerned about the exact details of that, and I am, on the contrary, quite happy with just having a character, a Dwarven lieutenant, who works as a not a force multiplier, but does what you expect a leader of troops to do.
Yeah.
Increases the powers of those troops.
Yeah, I do have some questions about the two figures in the background.
Yeah.
That he appears to be motivating.
I think they're smuggling bread.
Yeah, I was like, what are they doing exactly?
Yeah.
Because it looks like, and I know this is not what's happening, but it looks like they're taking rocks out of the bed of a truck.
Oh, I think that is what's happening. I think
it's probably more of a wagon, but I'm saying, maybe this is because we're in Texas, and I'm like, they're taking rocks out of the bed of a truck.
Okay, I think it is a wagon, and
yes.
they are taking rocks out, but you know why? Because they're putting them in the Dwarven catapult.
Okay.
It's right here.
Okay. You know what? I'm less upset about it now. That's fine. This makes sense. Yeah. Dwarven catapult. So this is a X spell.
Mm-hmm.
This one is X and red. It's an instant. And it does X damage divided evenly among all of opponent's creatures round down.
Yeah, that's... Huh. So, before we started recording this, I was saying, were there just 2 X spells before this? No, I was incredibly wrong. There were a dozen X spells before this.
There were actually quite a few.
But this does feel like just the next in... There are only 2 red direct damage X spells before this. Disintegrate, targeted one thing. Fireball is one of the more convoluted cards in early Magic, and I think I've gone off before about how there's only 1 or 2 cards that have a Y in the casting cost in any printing, and I like the XY red casting cost Fireball because it makes most clear how it's supposed to work, which is you can add a mana to increase the damage, or you can add a mana to increase the number of targets.
I like when cards make my opponents think about algebra.
Good, yes. More Fireballs for you.
Yes.
You have to play more red.
I only have 1 red deck.
Sorry. Is a Fireball in it?
No.
You have to put a Fireball in it.
Should I?
If we get you a beta Fireball, will you do it?
Absolutely.
All right. We're going to be at MagicCon. I can find a beta Fireball.
I can find a beta Fireball at MagicCon for, I don't know, probably not a completely irresponsible amount of money. I don't know.
Anyway, Dwarven Catapult, I think it must be so much worse. And we're not here to talk about how good cards are. We're here to talk about how flavorful they are. But in this case, I think we kind of have to. Because divided evenly among all of opponent's creatures round down, you can't control your opponent's board size.
Yeah.
And the bigger it is, the more you need this to not be getting worse.
Well, I mean, mechanically bad. Objectively bad. But I think that, flavor-wise, if we read the flavor text on this one, it says, often greatly outnumbered in battle, dwarves relied on catapults as the means of damaging a large army. Now, yes, this would be effective in the sense that you can just fling those rocks into the
Which rocks?
The rocks.
Those rocks?
Those rocks.
Okay.
You can fling those rocks.
Wait, it's the same artist. It's the same.
Okay. And actually, go up just a little bit.
It's the same castle?
The castle, and then this is down the hill.
Oh, how cool. Okay.
So this works. I'm not mad about this
This just went way up in my estimation. Just
not upset about it at all anymore. But, does this work? Yes, in that you don't really have to aim. You don't need any sharpshooters for this tactic.
Okay.
You just throw the rocks into the advancing horde. But, I mean... logistically, how long is it taking you to load the catapult? How many rocks do you have? You're not going to take out the whole army this way. So I think it does kind of make sense that the bigger your opponent's force is, the worse this kind of is.
Yeah. Man, this is just the most extreme example of one of these cards. It's what great flavor, but it doesn't work as a card.
It's not great, to play.
But honestly, this does tell the story of how they lost.
Yeah, this has told me more about how they lost than any other card we've looked at so far.
Legitimately, that's honestly pretty cool. Though I would not be pleased to open one.
No, I would not either.
Okay. So that's the end of the red dwarf cards.
Yes.
But then in each color there is a pair of lands, and in all or most cases, we'll see as we go through them. Today we're just going to talk about the red associated ones. The lands depict something from the related civilization. So we have Dwarven Hold and Dwarven Ruins. Which one are you talking about first?
I'm going to take Dwarven Hold. So this is a land, comes into play tapped. You can choose not to untap it during your untap phase, and instead you can put a storage counter on it. And then you can tap to remove any number of storage counters on it. For each storage counter removed, you add 1 red to your mana pool. So you can sit there and amass these counters. In the modern day, you would probably do some kind of nonsense where you proliferate them. But back then, I think we would have just been turn by turn, slowly adding these up until you have enough that you can do something with them.
In the same way that when I was like 14 and opening these when it was brand new, and I was so excited by the dream of Goblin Warrens.
Yes.
Because you could just go infinite.
Yeah, well, if nobody stops you, imagine how many you could get.
And you pair it with Dwarven Hold. And like, so I was sold on the dream of this. Like, oh yeah, I can play this like turn 1, and I can just do some stuff. And like what that stuff was going to be was not defined to survive till later.
Step 3.
And to a degree, like the kind of Magic that I was playing at that time was a lot slower and less efficient. Sure. So that wasn't as crazy. Still, I don't think this actually worked out. I don't have any... My memories from that period are pretty hazy due to the intervening 30 years, but...
No, that's crazy.
Yeah. But like I remember playing some Forces of Nature. I don't remember actually playing Dwarven Hold, getting it to actually do anything.
Well, I think like, especially when you're newer to the game... this has that appear like if no one interrupts you and you have infinite turns, you make all this mana, and then you get to tap it and play something really, really big. And then like in practice, that never really happens. Maybe you get to take like 4 counters off of it and do something, but it's not as impressive as you think it's gonna be.
But I think the dream of Magic, like the definition of what it is to be a Timmy, which I think is kind of the default position for a new player, is to want to do a big thing, and this helps you do a big thing, and that's cool.
That is cool. That is something cool. I think I'm trying to remember. I can't remember the specific card, but there's been a few like this in more recent years. Like when I was first getting into the game, I remember seeing and thinking like, oh, like I'm gonna get so many counters on this, and it's gonna be so crazy when I get to take all of them off. And then in practice, it like gets blowed up before that ever even happens. You're like, oh. This past decade of my Magic experience has been going from a neophyte drafter to being a pretty invested drafter, and it's basically been unlearning all of that. Getting rid of all of that intuitive excitement about that stuff. Yes.
I mean, it's so interesting.
Yes.
And it's very intellectually stimulating.
But you just have to squash that enthusiasm.
It's time to think in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, like you've had enough fun.
What can you do for me right this second?
Yeah, what can this card do for you right now? Nothing.
Yeah.
It comes into play tapped. Yeah. It's terrible.
But back to what we're here for.
Anyway.
The story this tells, I think, is phenomenal. And it does it for every civilization in this set, which is they're stocking up, they're holing up, they're barricading the door and preparing for the long night, for winter,
and I think that's wonderful flavor. I love the art on this. They've got this pulley system rigged up. I love this architecture with the dragon like looking over the top of the door frame. It's very cool.
Yeah. And then the Dwarven Ruins, similar, but it seems to depict if the Dwarven Hold is as the wars were escalating and they could see things were getting bleak. Dwarven Ruins is 100 years later, and it's just wow, it was all destroyed. It's gone, and it's it also really sells the flavor of Fallen Empires.
Yeah,
and it being just a look back at this absolute devastation. I guess the scale on it's kind of confusing because it looks like a mountain. But for a door to be taking up a third of a mountain's height is insane. So,
like, it's either a very small mountain, like more of a hill.
Yeah.
Or it's a very big door, which dwarves wouldn't need.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe they're moving large. Like, maybe they're wheeling the catapult into the mountain.
Yeah,
maybe they do need really tall
I feel
doors.
like dwarves will do crazy architectural things for style points.
Yeah, okay, that's fair. Like, they don't... they need...
Like Moria.
Yeah, do they need a doorway that high? No.
Are they going to make it?
They're going to make it, yeah.
Because no one else can do that.
Yeah, because they can. Yeah.
But this could also be like, from the perspective near the peak of a mountain.
Sure. Yeah, because we can't see the bottom of this. Like, we assume that this is the horizon line, I guess, or this is, we're standing on the ground. Yeah. But we don't know that, so hard to say.
Yeah, it definitely captures the feel of the set, though.
Yeah.
So I like both of these quite a bit. Also, mechanically, it looks terrible to me, but I'm pretty sure that it was actually decently playable.
Yeah, there's a few... I'm trying to think. There's a couple variants of this kind of thing that I've played around with. I mean, you have to jump through some hoops where you can make things come in untapped and whatnot. But
yeah.
But like, if this comes into play untapped, it's not so bad. So ordinarily comes into play tapped. You can tap it to add 1 mana to your mana pool. So, standard.
Sub in for a mountain.
Yeah, sub in for a mountain. Or you can tap it and sack it to add 2 red to your mana pool. So if you can find some way to abuse that, suddenly way better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's probably actually way more abusable today than it was back then.
Oh, yeah.
We have all kinds of loopholes now.
We have so many ways to abuse that now.
So that's the last of the dwarves. What do you think of the dwarves on the whole in this set?
They're interesting. I think they're very much what I would expect for dwarves, aside from the toughness power thing that we kind of talked about. They're not really doing anything that I wouldn't expect for dwarves, and they feel very Tolkien inspired. Yeah. Which I don't know how intentional that was, but we're building off of some very well-known fantasy tropes, so not surprising.
Yeah.
But like we were kind of talking about with the was it the Hildebrand brothers?
Yeah.
Some of this stuff does look like it could slot right into the Tales of Middle-earth.
Yeah.
And wouldn't look out of place at all. So I think that's kind of my takeaway from this, is that they feel very Tolkien-esque.
Yeah.
How about you?
It feels like there's a small number of them relative to the other creature in the other colors, the civilizations in the other colors, the good guys or whatever you want to call them. But I haven't actually done mathematical comparisons yet, but I'm highly confident some of them have significantly more, and it might just be because they're sharing space with 2 opponents, the goblins and the orcs.
Okay, yeah.
And I know when we were looking at the goblins, there weren't many goblin creatures, but still that took up some slots, and then the orcs, there were a reasonable number of them, and so I don't know, but there doesn't have to be exact symmetry between each color, so this is fine. Yeah, I don't think it really gave you a good framework for building a dwarf deck at the end of Fallen Empires, but it was in the context of an entire game, so that could come later. I don't know if it ever really has.
Yeah, I mean, we have had dwarves reappear in some sets.
Oh yeah.
There have been more dwarves. They still exist. They're still in modern day sets. I don't know that I've ever come across like a dwarves typal deck.
Yeah, exactly. But that's fine. But on the whole, I think pretty good storytelling.
Yeah, for the most part. I think I would have liked to see a little bit more about why they lost. There was that one card that really kind of captured it.
Yeah.
But on the whole, up until we got to that point, I was kind of confused about how they lost.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the weaker points in the storytelling. But them as just kind of expanding on them as a creature type that was pretty solid.
Sure.
Okay, so that's it for the dwarves, but there is one more red card we haven't looked at that is neither orc, nor goblin, nor dwarf. It's an Orgg!
It's a heckin' big chonker is what it is.
It is. Honestly, it does look like an orc or goblin mutant to me.
Yeah, it does.
I thought it was, honestly, before we started doing the research for this set. I just thought, it's like summon goblin mutant or something.
Is that a dog?
The art is amazing, isn't it?
What is that?
Yes, I think it's a dog. I think.
Why does its mouth open like that?
With the human teeth?
Yeah.
I don't know. I love it. It's got those crazy eyes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't look like magic art, really. It looks like, I don't know. For some reason, it says very 90s to me, but it's like local comic strip in like your local paper that's not nationally syndicated. I don't know.
I love how many arms the Orgg has. He's got at least 3, maybe 4.
I've got to check real quickly here and see if they changed his creature type over the years. Nope, it's still just an Orgg. I thought they might have changed it to a beast or even like a goblin beast or something, but no.
There have been a lot of them that have since been eroded to fit into other creature types.
But I guess it was important historically that an Orgg is an Orgg.
Are there other Orggs, or is this the only one?
I bet not, but let's find out. What?
There are more, and they all have 4 arms and basically look like this.
One of them's a nightmare, though. It's like literally typed nightmare.
Orgg. That is so interesting,
It looks very similar to a regular Orgg, though.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm kind of disappointed by this. Like, the original Orgg was so goofy. It was such a goober.
They're all 6/6s, which is interesting.
Huh.
Yeah, this thing is wild. I love the flavor text. It's bigger than it thinks.
Yeah.
So what does it think it is?
And that's the mechanic tie-in.
Yeah.
So that's a great combination because it cannot attack if their opponent controls an untapped creature of power greater than 2. And it can't block anything with power greater than 2.
That's so interesting.
So it can only rumble with small things.
It doesn't know how big it is.
Yeah.
That's kind of cute.
Yeah. So I think the dog is there kind of saying, hey, it thinks it's one of these. I think that's the idea.
I love that.
I know, it's such a
also,
good
like, look at all its little hairs on top of its head. Like, I bet they're so bristly.
It looks like a capybara hair.
It reminds me of when I was little. My dad took me to a circus when I was like 5 years old. So right after this, like a year after this set came out, where they had elephants that you could just ride, that you didn't have to sign a waiver or anything. They would just like put your kid up on top of an elephant. Sure. And I remember very distinctly that it had these like bristly hairs on top of its head, very much, or like the back of its neck area, like that, the way that looks. So that is, that's really cool.
Yeah. It doesn't fit into the rest of Fallen Empires in any particular way, but it's so cool.
I love it.
Yeah, me too.
This is my favorite card so far.
So I have quite a few old books and magazines here from the early days of Magic, and this one is the official encyclopedia, published by The Duelist, who I think I mentioned earlier. The Duelist was Wizards of the Coast's magazine. And so this is written essentially by company insiders, and they have an introduction to the Fallen Empires. And the fundamental thing is, this is pre-Scryfall, pre-internet. I mean, the internet existed now, but you couldn't trivially just go look up pictures of all the cards. So they publish these books, which have pictures of all the cards in every set, and some narrative about them, and like the commonality and all that.
I remember this kind of thing being super common for like Pokemon and stuff, where it's just like, here are full color pictures of every card in the set.
There are 2 parts I want to share out of this. Let me just start from here. Originally criticized by players for being weak and too difficult to use, Fallen Empire's reputation was further damaged by the oversupply of cards in the market. In the last year, however, the reputation of the set has begun to recover, and more Fallen Empires cards are beginning to appear on the tournament scene. Then it has this little section, Famous Cards in Magic, Fallen Empires, and I wanted to just read through them as we come to them, and the Orgg is the first one we've come to. They're just 4. But you want to read that out?
Yeah. Orgg. It's cheap. It's big. It tramples. And when Ice Age was released, few players believed that it was worthwhile for serious competitive play.
Oh. But I also have this book here, Deep Magic. All of these have half-price stickers
I feel like we need to take a moment to just like put the cover on screen for folks that may not have seen this in person, so they can appreciate this.
There you go. But it includes basically a tournament report on Nationals, the U.S. Nationals 1995, which seems to have been a Type 2 tournament. So they had recently invented Standard. When they invented Type 2 Standard, the sets included were Revised, Fallen Empires, and the Dark. And I was trying to find the exact history of what got included where. The phrasing in this book was that Type 2 is defined as the most recent core set and the most recent 2 expansions.
Okay.
Not blocks, because blocks didn't exist yet. every reference I can find online to the early definitions of Type 2 said the most recent 2 blocks.
Okay.
So it's not entirely clear to me. So this tournament happens shortly after 4th and Ice Age come out. And it looks like the Dark was not allowed. Every card on these lists is from Fallen Empires, Ice Age, and 4th edition. So I think that is actually... Okay. It was literally 2 sets at the time. Clearly that changed pretty quickly after that. But one of the decks here listed in this top 4 is called Mike Long's Orgg deck. Literally, Orgg deck is... I don't know if Mike Long called it that, or if just this author called it that, but I will bring it up on the screen here. And it's pretty wild to see decks from this era. I mean, I exist kind of on the periphery of old school Magic. Like, I know some people who are into it, and I put together an old school deck with a bunch of winter orbs.
Yeah.
But I've only played it like twice. And so it's just neat to see what was competitive, like highly competitive.
Yeah.
This is like Mike Long is kind of an infamous person now, but like was a top tier player at the time. And had 3 Orggs in this deck, and it's pretty clear, like so many of these decks here involve Black Vice and the rack. Like they're gonna mess with your hand size one way or another, and a lot of them have just this one of mind twist and stuff like this one does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm into this nonsense. Yeah. This looks like some stuff I'd like to play.
So Orgg, I guess, was just a pretty good creature by those standards, because creatures were so bad on the whole early on. It looks like this deck's playing Lightning Bolts and Incinerates. Looks like a lot of the creature removal was Lightning Bolt.
Yeah.
And some of the decks definitely played Dark Banishing. I don't know if I saw any Terrors in this list. So there was some just kill a thing out there. And Paralyze obviously would work on it too. But apparently that was just big and strong enough to finish a game that you otherwise... I mean, there's also Stone Rains in this deck. This is a land destruction. This is a control deck where Orgg is one of your finishers. And that was good enough to top 4. Isn't that wild? It's so styled. I love that. Orgg.
I mean, I could kind of see it with the math, because even if you don't use the lightning bolts to attack target creatures, I mean, that just, like, let's see, you get Orgg is a 6/6.
Yeah.
So if it gets in unblocked
3 times, and then you lightning bolt to face.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and Incinerate also goes to face. So yeah, like
6 is probably just enough that if you can get him in a couple times, you can finish out the game, I would imagine.
And I guess there's a couple Black Vices here in the main deck too. So I guess the idea is you destroy their land so they can't do anything.
Yeah.
They anything they can cast, any creatures that would block are small enough to kill with the lightning bolts. And basically they just flood with cards in the hand that they can't cast, and then they die from the Black Vice.
Yeah.
Or the Orgg,
I mean, that seems legit.
Yeah. So, previously, at the end, I think we had said we would try and do the rest of red and green today, but I don't want that kind of time commitment today, and I'd like to keep the remaining colors together. So instead, how about we talk about the boon artifacts?
Yes, the cycle of artifacts in this set that each call back to the original 5 boons, which you may be familiar with.
To varying degrees.
Some of them are banned.
It's so wild that Richard Garfield designed this cycle, 1 in each color, where you spend 1 mana of that color and get 3 of something that fits in with the color pie as conceived of at the time with that color. Yeah. And so, I mean, Dark Ritual turned out to be a little much, and they kind of took... I mean, really a little bit, because they reprinted it in Ice Age, and they reprinted it in Urza's Saga. Like, it was a core part of the game in Black's color identity for like 6 years before they decided it was too powerful.
It was a bit much.
Whereas like the Mox and Black Lotus, they realized those were too powerful immediately and took them out. So Dark Ritual, they didn't pick up on that. But then there was also Ancestral Recall, which they very much did
picked up on. That 1 blue for 3 cards, a little much.
That's 5 mana now, is where they've settled on.
I think, that's like the going rate for that ability. So it turns out 1 was a little too cheap. I disagree, but you know what? They didn't ask me.
They didn't want us just doing a bunch of Reanimator shenanigans where you immediately draw 3, have to discard your your Atraxa to hand size and reanimate on turn 2.
I mean, I've certainly never done that.
I mean, Legacy just does that anyway, but they didn't need that. Okay. Lightning Bolt, even a little too strong, because even though it's still in Modern, right? Yeah, like it's a foundational
still a staple card,
but it's not in Pioneer. It's probably never going to be. It's not in Standard. Like, Shock is it.
Yeah.
They've decided 2 damage to any target is correct for 1 mana. Giant Growth is the only, like, still relevant.
Yeah, it's fine. Target creature gets +3/+3, still fine until end of turn.
Yep.
And then the white one, healing, Balm of Restoration, is just
Healing Salve.
Healing Salve is the original. I'm looking at the text of the
right.
Healing Salve is the original. The white 1-drop, gain 3 life or prevent up to 3 damage from being dealt to a single target.
Yeah.
Completely not relevant anymore.
They tried to fix it with Balm of Restoration to make it relevant by, like, basically doubling the effect. By giving you both things, but it still wasn't good enough. So that's just life gain kind of by itself just doesn't cut it. It's got to be attached to something. On a creature, very different story.
Yeah, true.
So yeah, those are the original boons. And what they clearly did was create an artifact, and I think they were very explicit about this, that they created artifacts that let you have those abilities in other colors, but at a less efficient rate. And that's always been part of what artifacts' identity is.
Yeah.
Is letting you do things in any color, but it's expensive. Like JMD Tome lets you draw cards in any color, but at an absurd cost.
Which I think is totally fair, because generally they're colorless, so you can put them in any deck. And the downside of that is that it's just not going to be as efficient.
Yeah, I think it's a great design principle. Interestingly, all 5 of these are on the reserve list. Like, when I was looking through this, I had forgotten they existed.
Yeah.
Like the Goblin Sharugener and things like those stick in my mind. I think about those every day of my life. But
as you should.
But these I had forgotten they existed, and I assumed they were like uncommon 3s, but no, they were all uncommon 1s that immediately went on the reserve list.
Interesting.
But they had a couple of things to say about these as well. Let's start with how they referred to them in terms of competitive play. You want to?
Yeah, let's see. So, how do you say that one?
Aeolipile.
Aeolipile? Okay, is that how we say it?
It references Aeolus, the Greek god of the West Wind, I think.
Okay, Aeolipile.
I might still be wrong about the pronunciation. It might be Aeolipili or something like that. I think it's Aeolipile.
Aeolipile.
Yeah.
This reminds me of, like, aioli sauce.
It might have the same root.
I don't know. Probably not. I'm just hungry. Fair. This is a great addition to non-red decks. This artifact allowed colorless sources to do direct damage. Although Aeolipile was sneered at early on, once the rules for Type 2 were changed to include all imprint expansions, Aeolipile became a common deterrent to the big creature threats of the current Type 2 tournament decks.
That is an absurd statement.
Yeah.
To the big creature threats, it does 2 damage.
Apparently that's enough.
I guess they didn't mean large creatures. I guess they meant, oh no, creatures are coming to get you.
You can get rid of them with this.
And then there's another section in here that I'm just not done ripping on this article. It's so ridiculous. The set also brought to Magic a new category of, quote, threat cards, whose ability can be used at almost any time. Aeolipile, Armor Thrall, Thorn Thallet, Acacian Priest, and Dwarven Armorer are all examples of this kind of menace. They're just instant speed abilities. That's it.
The wording in this is very, it's really giving, like, the satanic panic. Like, I can see a, like, very conservative minister, like, soapboxing about this.
It feels like Harold Hill in the Music Man. Yeah,
like, we have to deal with this menace.
You got trouble with all these banding one-ones. You gotta kill them before they can attack.
You just gotta snip that in the bud. You can't let that get out of control.
I'm floored by categorizing instant speed interaction as a new thing. And I thought, okay, so maybe there wasn't a lot of that in Alpha, but no, there was Prodigal Sorcerer.
Yeah, it's like we've had that,
there was regenerated instant speed. There was all kinds of instant speed stuff. I mean, it wasn't...
Why is this noteworthy?
Yeah, and these are all on permanence. Yeah. But, like, again, Prodigal Sorcerer. And lots of other things in Alpha could be used at instant speed, like all the mono artifacts that tap to do something.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It is interesting that they are making a point to call that.
It just feels like word padding in an article, and it's just...
They're like, we have to get to 500 words for this.
Yeah, they just really wanted to hype up Fallen Empires.
How do we get there?
It's like they knew they had to acknowledge that it hadn't been a hit, but they were gonna develop it now.
They're like, but you can do things at instant speed.
Yeah. But
still
Aeola Pile is still the funniest one to me because it's a word with an actual meaning, and it just means like a rudimentary steam engine.
Interesting.
And it's just like it doesn't do anything. It's an ancient discovery, right? I think described the device in the 1st century AD, says Wikipedia. And it just demonstrates steam power as a principle that can like spin a little ball. I don't know who confused it or decided that it should be an explosive device.
Is it? Well, it looks like it's... Is it just the steam that's dealing the damage? Like, what Maybe about this is dealing damage?
I guess. We haven't read the flavor text. Although fragile, the Aeola Pile could be quite destructive. And that's all we get. To me, it's always looked like it's underwater. Yeah. Because of these little orange...
The tendrils and the orange bubble things.
Yeah, they look like bubbles, right?
Like, what is that?
I don't know. But knowing that the actual device relates to steam, that probably is steam.
Yeah. I mean, steam could definitely deal 2 damage.
Maybe it's supposed to be like napalm flying out of this thing. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. That's interesting.
I like the art. It's just like visually appealing, but I don't think it makes any sense.
Yeah, I like looking at it. I kind of want to keep looking at it.
Yeah.
Like,
which is ironic for something I'm complaining about.
Yeah, I'm like, for the most part. Should I print this out really big and like put it up somewhere at my house?
It's cool looking. It is.
It's cool.
It's just not a coherent concept as a card.
Yeah, it's like one of those things where the more I think about it, I'm like, what is this actually doing?
Yeah. All these lines at the bottom are like just force.
I think about these kind of concepts too much because like I was talking with a friend about the Duskmourn set as a whole and just like the plane, and somehow we got on the topic of like, okay, but what do they eat? Like, what do the people of Duskmourn eat?
Yeah.
And I don't know. This is one of those things where, like, the more I think about it, I'm like, but what's happening here? Like, is the steam doing the damage? What are the orange bubbles? What's inside of it? Is it some kind of caustic chemical, or is it just the heat from the steam that's is it the broken glass that's flying? So I just need to think about it less and look at the pretty picture.
Yeah.
Because it is very pretty.
But Valgavoth makes the food.
What is it, though?
It's just food. Valgavoth lets the house replenish everything to basically farm the residents.
So is there just like a pantry with never-ending food in it?
Kind of, yeah. Like the scavengers go out and get supplies, and the supplies just replenish themselves. Like it's the side stories.
But I'm like, but what is it? Like, is it? Are there crops?
Probably TV dinners.
Are there TV dinners?
I don't know.
Are there chicken nuggets? Like,
I wouldn't be surprised.
Like if I go to
Don't go to Duskmourn.
But I want to.
Okay.
It's my kind of place.
No, this is Fallen Empire.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so I think we've said all there is to say about Aeola Pile.
Yes.
And I'm afraid there isn't a terrible lot to say about the others, but we'll see. Yeah. We'll give it a shot. And it doesn't seem to have anything to do with the other red cards.
Yeah.
Notably. Next on the list, I have Elven Lyre, though. And that, Elven. Elves are is the green civilization, so that's something.
Yeah. This one is same thing. It's a 2-drop artifact. Pay 1 and tap it. You sacrifice it to give a target creature +2/2 until end of turn. This one says, scholars are uncertain whether it was the actual sound or some other magical property of the Elven Lyre that transformed its player. So this implies that by playing the lyre...
Yeah, you get the buff.
Get something. And I've just noticed that there is an octopus or squid or something on the lyre, and that's really cool.
It is! And this is my opportunity to... I put a correction in text under it last time, but now I can correct that her name is Kaya, not Kaja. Kaya Folio. And look at that, she put her name in the that's how she signed it. That's how cool.
That's really cool. I like that.
Yeah, this is actually pretty neat art.
Yeah, I like this art a lot. This is another one very pretty to look at.
Yeah, and this one does tie much more clearly into the story. in that it's doing the same thing that they were doing in Antiquities, which again, same creative team created this set where they are describing these objects in the past tense and talking about here kind of unearthing the story.
Yeah, like scholars don't fully understand how this works. I think this is really interesting because generally speaking, when I think of like magical instruments, I think of something where the sound itself is going to transform the listener and that it's not necessarily going to affect the player. But this is kind of a curious twist on that. I like this angle.
Yeah, that's neat. All right. Balm of Restoration.
This one is interesting.
By interesting.
I'm trying to figure out what's going on in the art with the orbs.
The magical orbs.
Yeah.
This one's so. Where to start? It's Margaret Orgg Keane. Certainly wasn't in the first. She wasn't an alpha artist. I'm 90% sure of that. Let me verify that before I ever commit to something. Okay. So she started in Antiquities. That's right. Oh, Ivory Tower. Okay. So that's probably her best known work. And then all of her contributions were through Tempest was the last one, but she uses these geometric motifs in the background a lot in a way that I just
repeating theme for
you just don't see that in other art. Lion's Eye Diamond.
Yeah, that's a very notable one.
yeah. And I like that. I like that it's a sparse little spice in the overall fabric of the game's art for a while. It's kind of neat, but it's not. It doesn't fit really well within the rest. Yeah. It's just that it's idiosyncratic.
It is. So, like, one of the things that stands... This is really pretty art. I like looking at it. I'm very confused by the woman's attire.
Yeah, this is...
And how this fits into the world of Fallen Empires.
Yeah, it's like... It's pre-Victorian, right? Yeah. It's like...
It feels French, a like kind of Marie Antoinette area. Yeah, like
era is a pretty specific point in time.
But yeah, this is a very interesting addition to this set because this doesn't look like anything else we've seen so far. I haven't seen any other characters dressed in this way.
Yep.
And she's engaged in kind of an interesting activity.
Yeah.
So the function of this card is you sacrifice this thing to gain 2 life or prevent up to 2 damage to any player or creature. And so she has this like alchemical thing in front of her, which she is affecting somehow.
Yeah. Definitely magic. I mean, like that's the kind of power in her hands.
Feels magical, but I'm not clear on what exactly is happening in terms of how does this tie into the Balm of Restoration and what this does. I'm not sure.
The flavor text is, not all armies enjoyed the services of a medic. For them, Balm of Restoration was that much more valuable. Which doesn't tell us anything else. It's just like, well, that's the magical thing, and that's what it does. But yeah, it's not a clear mechanic. But that's... I don't know. This is another one that's just an art piece. Doesn't feel nearly as connected to the set as most. I mean, the flavor text says Sarpadian Empires Volume 1 on it. So it literally does tie in, but it's pretty loose.
Yeah.
And that's just largely true of this cycle, I think. Let's actually skip ahead one more, because I think the most to say about that. And let's go to Implements of Sacrifice next.
Same artist. So this one is the Black Boon. And this one you sacrifice it to add 2 mana of any one color. You can play this as an interrupt.
Yeah. Relics of the Order of the Ebon Hand, the bowl and dagger bespeak the hideous cruelty of its rituals. So this easily does the best world building of these artifacts. I mean, it ties it to one of the factions, the Ebon Hand, who, I mean, we'll have their episode later, but they're all about the sacrifice.
Yeah.
Black color identity, yep. And toned down dark ritual. Everything so far is just the normal thing the boon does, but minus 1. 2 instead of 3.
Yeah.
And you're spending 2 colorless to cast it and a 3rd colorless to activate it. So it's more expensive, and smaller effect.
Yeah.
The art does not resemble the rest of the Ebon Hand art at all.
No, and I kind of like the threatening aura that it has, like the way she's holding the knife.
Yeah.
There's something very mundane about this that I think...
But she looks completely modern.
She does.
Like in 1994.
Yeah, like this is just a modern woman who is engaged in some kind of nefarious ritual.
Like if you told me that that was a self-portrait, I would not be surprised. I have no idea what she looks like, but...
Yeah. Well, like, there's nothing about this that feels like it has to be in the world of magic or it has to belong to Fallen Empires.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I kind of like how mundane this feels.
Yeah.
And that belying the hideous cruelty of, you know, like
the art on the artifacts throughout this set, all the artifacts in this set, none of them really seem to be taking place in the same world as all the rest of the cards.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think is a little bit of a minus, because the cards on the whole, even though we have complaints about things like the Dwarves not being tough enough, like the set has really got quite a bit of cohesion thematically. But these artifacts, not so much. Clearly there's some flavor text which is doing work.
Yeah, this feels like kind of a point of view shift where we're seeing these, even though everything in this set is kind of being looked at from the present into the past.
Yeah.
This feels more like we're seeing these in the modern day.
And talking
about them now. Whereas the other stuff is more like you're reading through a history book.
That's a subtle distinction, but I think you're right. Yeah, and so this could be whoever's narrating, that's the narrator depicted talking to us about these implements, which are relics.
She's giving a lecture about the relics of the of the order.
Honestly, that makes sense. I buy that. I like that. All right, canon. All right, well then let's move on to Conchorn, which is most mechanically interesting, and that's why I wanted to...
Yes. So this is the toned down version of
Ancestral Recall. But it's not at all, though.
It's not. So
there's extra steps. So what does it actually do?
So you pay 2, again, you pay 2 to cast it, pay 1 generic, tap it, sack it, draw 2 cards, then put any 1 card from your hand back on top of your library.
Which is actually Brainstorm.
Yeah.
I mean, -1.
Kind of a proto-Brainstorm effect.
And so the rest of the boon cycle was common. They made Ancestral Recall rare, realizing, I think, that it was more powerful before actually going to print. There's kind of... It's hard to... I haven't found a clear, verifiable source about why that happened, how that happened. I've seen assertions, like, on the wiki that don't have a clear citation about how, Richard Garfield realized this was more powerful and shifted it to rare, maybe. That's plausible. But clearly they realized that Ancestral Recall was too powerful, but they wanted comparable effect. And as we noted last week, the team that designed Fallen Empires also designed Antiquities and Ice Age. And they worked on Ice Age first. Before, like, the time Alpha was coming out, Ice Age was in progress. So I suspect they had simply designed Brainstorm. Brainstorm was a card they knew how they wanted to fix Ancestral Recall, and it basically existed in their minds already. So in creating this boon cycle that's just scaled back versions of the boons, they just said, okay, well, we'll use the fixed version. And ta-da! That makes perfect sense then.
Yeah, this one, the flavor text for Conchorn says, even the most skilled of modern mages only partially understand the Conchorn's awesome power. Which, like, that is a statement.
Yeah. It's neat. I remember thinking how cool when I read this when it was new. So that, I think it is good flavor text writing in the general Magic sense, but it could have been an alpha card. Like, it has nothing to do with Fallen Empires.
Yeah. Sure, it's just there.
Yeah. I mean, except that it's blue, and it's a conch from the sea, but that's just blue stuff. That was alpha blue stuff, too. But it's also this set's blue stuff. Everything's in the ocean. It's the merfolk versus the crustacean people.
Yes.
But we don't see Conchorns anywhere else.
Crustacean nation.
Yeah. And she doesn't resemble any of the merfolk that we see on cards, so I'm not sure she's supposed to be. It is Phil Folio art, And it is, I think, perhaps the least, I want to say least cartoony, but that's not quite right. It's almost Quentin Hoover art in that, and partly, I guess, the stained glass in the back, and Quentin Hoover art always looks like stained glass to me, even if it's actually more like Art Deco. But just having the thick lines differentiated from like the cell shading.
Yeah.
I like it. This is, I think, my favorite Phil Folio art.
It's very striking. Like I'm imagining like opening this in a pack, and like I'd be excited to see this. Like it just visually looks really cool.
Yeah. None of these feel like uncommon ones. They don't feel like rare equivalents to me. They feel like they should have been in that U3 uncommon slot, but this is pretty cool. I don't think I appreciated the mechanical value of this when I was younger.
Yeah.
But I've top of deck manipulation and such, that's just never intuitively felt as powerful to me as it actually is.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's like, I understand Lightning Bolt. I understand Crawworm. Crawworm. That's who I am.
This is more nuanced.
This is more nuanced than I can't handle that. I have to work on being able to handle that.
Yeah.
I have to learn to appreciate that.
It's okay. I think my most embarrassing Magic story was like, I got into Magic during Cons of Tarkir, and I just did not understand why fetch lands were as good as they are.
That's a common.
Like, it was like, okay, cool, you can get one of these two colors.
Yeah.
Neat. Yeah. I guess. I remember like opening one in a pack, and I was like, oh, like,
yeah. No, I get that. That's a journey I think we all go on.
Yeah, or just did not grasp the applications of that at the time.
Yeah. All right. So I think that's all we're gonna go through today. We have a lot of cards left to go over, and I think our plan is each color will hit with a single episode from here on out, and there are a number more artifacts that aren't part of particular cycles that we'll get in mixed kind of to break up those episodes a little bit. But it might be a little while before we get the next one out because we have MagicCon Vegas.
We do.
That we are leaving for in a week from
1 week
time of recording.
Yes.
Yeah, so that even if we get the next one recorded before we leave, I probably won't get it edited before.
That's fair.
So yeah, all right. I hope that we see some of you there.
Yeah, we might. I don't have them with me, and I don't know if this will come out before we leave.
Yeah.
But I have created some special skeleton tokens that we will be passing out at the convention. There's a unique one that I drew and a unique one that you drew.
Yeah.
And I had them.
It's not good art, but it's
that's
personal.
what makes them good.
Very personal.
Yes, it's not.
Yours is good art. Mine's not. Good. I'm not throwing shade at you.
I was like, hey, so you can speak for yourself.
This is just I am. That's what I'm trying to do.
But like yours is fun.
Yeah.
You know, I'm very excited to share them with everybody. I had them like professionally printed up, so like they're legit looking tokens.
Yeah, they're cool.
And they are skeletons, which seemed fitting.
Yeah, so if you happen to actually recognize us, please ask for one.
Yes.
We'd love to talk to you.
Yes.
I'm back in my vintage 1994 flannel, which, contemporaneous with Fallen Empires. I've created a new mini game for myself, which just to see if I can keep track of this garment in my house over the period of this video series, which is probably going to be like 4 more weeks.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can do that, but it's going to be a neat challenge.
You should get yourself a prize if you do.